what I'd like to see. So in our Telegram group, I'd like people to demonstrate, to draw out their construction, to actually showcase why this area squared, why c squared, is equal to the equivalent of a squared and b squared. So why is it that this square of b plus this square of a, when added together, always will give you the hypotenuse squared of c? So that there are a few different choices you could make as far as physical constructive proofs, but I'd like people to show me some of what they came up with to fully prove to themselves and easily communicate why that's true. So we have that Telegram group, and that maybe for this week will be the focus, the primary question that people could send me pictures of, and then next week we'll evaluate some of the solution concepts and see what people came up with. And if they want, like I said, the lingering question still hovering is, what is the side of a triangle? If the radius is 1, what would the triangle be inside that circle? What about the side of the square? And what about the side of the hexagon and pentagon? Obviously, the pentagon is going to be tougher, but just think about them and send pictures like we did last week or the week before last, and send them my way, and then we'll all just look at them and talk them through, see who got it, who missed it, who came close. And how I by the way, Declan, your proofs were some of the most beautiful, elegant proofs that are constructions that we looked at last week. It was great. Very good.
Thank you.
All right. So what I did, like usual, the metaphysical ideas that Kepler is about to demonstrate are elegant. They're very Platonic. The fact that we read the Phaedo, and before that, you guys read the Theaetetus, puts everyone here in a really great place to understand how Kepler is thinking in a way that most people have not earned. So that's wonderful. But I prepared a little 30-minute, maybe 40-minute brief slideshow just to sort of situate some of the concepts we're going to see, probably 30 minutes from Kepler, which I'm going to just showcase now. And then we'll just jump into Kepler's actual writings. So this chapter that we're going to read, chapter 3 of book 4 of the Harmonies, is called What Are the Types of the Harmonized? That is, and this is all Kepler's words, of the things, whether sensible or immaterial, in which the harmonies have been expressed, whether by God or man, and in what way. Big subtitle. There's 5 key concepts that I think it's good to have in the back of our minds. Kepler definitely worked through these core concepts. Lyndon LaRouche put a lot of emphasis upon these concepts in his Science of a Christian Economy. We're going to just look through very summarily some of them. Number 1, the one, the many, and the infinite. This is going to come up today. Number 2, the quantization of space. So how must space be quantized? How to think about that. Number 3, the commensurable and incommensurable. Number 4, minimum maximum principle. And number 5, harmony in its various manifestations, specifically in the arts, but a lot of other things too, like we've been continuously dealing with for the past few weeks. On the first part, one, many, and infinite, very simple concept, but something that people take for granted. For those who have had a chance to read the Plato Philebus dialogue, really, really highly, highly recommend this particular dialogue. It's really good. One of my favorites. And in it, he treats the question of, well, basically how everything that is ponderable can be conceptualized both as a one thought, but can be broken up into many, and also can be infinitely divided and broken up. Specifically in this dialogue, he's talking about pleasure and pain, and how the types of physical pleasures, if people were to judge good and evil using the metric of pleasure and pain, they would encounter some difficulties, some contradictions that escape reason. Number 1 is that there are infinite degrees and types of pleasure and of pain. They go together. You know, if you have too much of something or too little of something that you need, it can become painful, right? Hunger or overeating, both are forms of pain, right? You could be addicted to things that are pleasurable, where you always want more. becomes more difficult, right? And just the very act of constantly chasing ever increasing yearnings can be a form of pain. And he makes the point that people often will make the mistake of discovering that things can be either one or infinite, and will get lazy-minded and will skip over and not think about the quantized finiteness within the boundary conditions of the one and the infinite. So Socrates speaks, or Plato speaks through Socrates, saying, all the things which are ever said to exist are sprung from one and many, and have inherent in them the finite and the infinite. This being the way in which these things are arranged, we must always assume that there is in every case one idea of everything, and must look for it. For we shall find that it is there. And if we get a grasp of this, we must look next for two, if there be two, and if not, for three, or for some other number. And again, we must treat each of those units in the same way until we can see not only that the original unit is one and many and infinite, but just how many it is. And we must not apply the idea of the infinite to the plurality until we have a view of its whole number between infinity and one. Then, and not before, we may let each unit of everything pass on unhindered into infinity. He who never looks for number in anything will not himself be looked for in the number of famous men. And in this, yeah, go on.
When we're looking for number, like he's talking about one, and then you look for two or three. Say we find two, do we view two as like one again? Is that kind of what he's
Every
saying?
number is also a one. Yeah, there two is distinct from one or three, so it has its own identity of two-ness, right? That's not threeness
Two,
or
yeah.
oneness or fiveness. But it's also two. It's not just one, right? It's both a multiplicity and also it has quality of unity.
So like you just look at it like many ways, I guess.
You have to look at it in many ways in the mind, yeah. And if you think
Is
about
it
it,
like comparing? Are we talking about like comparing? Is that what that is? Just
well,
constantly comparing?
he uses two particular examples in the Phoebus dialogue that arise to give people like a sense of specifics. He gives one is of language and sound, and the other one that Plato chooses is of a string that produces sound. And in both cases, he says, well, look, if you have a continuous function in sound, we have like like think of all of the spectrum of sound that you can make, right? It's kind of like an infinite spectrum of but within that spectrum, there are specific discrete moments, intervals that have been selected, A, E, I, O, U, that Plato talks about, which we associate a symbol with, which becomes sort of the structural backbone of language, of the vowels, right? So even though there's a continuous function, which is an infinite continuously divisible function of spectrum of sound, there are very specific moments that were chosen in every language to associate letters discretely, around which a finite set of symbols could be used around which to construct language. And then for the string, he uses that example of like there's one string which you pluck and it emits a certain, like a guitar string, and it'll emit sound based on its vibration, its length, its tension. It'll emit a certain frequency. And you could make infinite possible notes, right? If you just pluck your bowstring, there's infinite possible sounds that one singular string can make, but we will select specific divisions along the chord that are consonant at specific ratios that Plato talks about in that dialogue too. So there's like an infinite, a one, and also a many that one can explore with their reason by first dividing that string into two and discovering that we have an octave, right? So the frequency of half the string to the whole string will be as 1 to 2. It'll vibrate 2 times fast if you're vibrating half the string. and that pitch will still be, it'll have a similar quality as your whole string. The half will have a similar quality, but it'll be like a high C and a low C, right? And so you could then find other divisions within the octave accordingly. So that's what Plato uses, and Kepler cites that quite a bit in the context of his construction, or his construction of his what becomes his three planetary laws of motion. So infinite, one, many. There's an idea of boundary conditions that you have to think about, as far as like the art of thinking, the art of reasoning, which is what these guys are all zeroing in on. Since we're talking about Kepler and we're talking about astronomy, we've been looking at the question of the obvious infinite that every human at every generation has been confronted with, which is this like amazing, you look at the night sky if you're out of a city, and it's just, incredible amount of infinite stars that you could see, and some of them happen to be other things like planets, but that you can only know later on. And with telescopes, we can keep on penetrating deeper and deeper into the darkness, and we discover that it's not really all that dark. It's actually a lot of light and life, and as deep as we penetrate, we discover that there's more galaxies, there's more to see, there's more like substance to be viewed. But how do you make sense of this? Is it chaotic? Right? It looks kind of chaotic. So what signs would we have to start pondering and making sense of all of that seeming chaos? So at some point, I don't know when, somebody decided that you could trace out slowly over the course of the night sky the motion of various stars. And, it was discovered that around, if you're in the northern hemisphere, there's one particular place around which all of the stars move in the course of one night. And this is one night's motion of the Earth rotating, which from the standpoint of somebody standing on the Earth would appear as though you have these concentric circles in motion. And does that mean the universe is moving around us? It certainly means that there's one apparently fixed position relative to us, which doesn't appear to be moving. How do you make sense of that? Right? How do you map that out? And like Stephen got across in his wonderful class on the maps of the ancient sea kings, there's something known as the celestial sphere. And if you were going to try to wrap your mind around what's going on, it would be very useful to first create a mapping of a sphere with ourselves positioned in the middle of that sphere. And that would be called the celestial sphere. And one could chart as many of the stars as they could. And they could discover a sort of relationship of the Earth's relationship to the sun. And they could call that the plane of the ecliptic. And then around that plane of the Earth-Sun relationship that they could extend outwards, they could then see where all of the other planets move above or below at different times of the year. And at what degree above or below the plane of the ecliptic do those planets move? Well, what about what type of longitudinal motion do they move in another degree of rotation? And then these can be things that we could then chart onto our spherical mapping, right? And we could choose to, let's say, divide it by 12 or 6 or 5. I mean, it's a big question. Why did they choose 12 divisions of that sphere, right? Is there a reason, or was it arbitrary? Always a good question to ask. Is there the fact that other civilizations also chose to divide the celestial sphere into 12 is an interesting phenomenon. Why? What might they be thinking about? So
I was
that's
trying to
huh?
I was trying to divide when we're doing the circles and lines and things. I was trying to divide the circle, and I found out that 12s, 24s, and 60, like 60 minutes in a clock even. And it most of the first, well, the first 6 numbers fit into that, except the number 5, which is the pentagon.
well,
So
five
I
five
just
fits
thought
into
I'd mention that.
5 fits into
Oh,
60.
yeah, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I had a problem putting 5 in there, like mapping it on the circle. That's
Oh, I
something I got
see.
to work out yet. But
Right.
what I'm getting at is,
Mhm.
I'm pretty sure that the ancients, they were using compasses and figuring things out on paper as well,
Oh yeah,
uh,
most
to
certainly.
come up with those numbers.
Well, and I like your way of thinking about like, well, why 360, right? Like, why is it that we've chosen 360 for the degrees around which a circle moves? Why not 392? Why not 280? Why 360? Right? Is it arbitrary, or is there a reason? You're on the right path.
It starts with the Sumerians, surely.
I mean, we could, it might be before that, but it might be before that. It might be something else.
Exactly. I mean, I'll say the word Atlantis to cover all of that ancient history thing, if you like. But yes, definitely. But the first record of 360 degrees, etc., is the entire sexagesimal system that the Sumerians operated under, 60 being the base root.
Well, I could say, as far as an elegant, constructive, reasonable proof that I've encountered, a very simple and elegant proof would occur when one evaluates those, what would be the lowest common denominator around which one could find a commensurability of the internal angles within the elementary constructible shapes of triangle, square, pentagon, hexagon, octagon, and look at take a note, make a list of all of the internal angles that one could construct within them, and think about how they could all fit into the lowest common denominator of something. That might also find other physical usages too. It's an interesting thing to explore, but you have to do the work of figuring out of constructing those shapes, and then looking at building up all of the internal angles, and then seeing, what comes up, what comes out at you.
I would say that with a circle, it's very spontaneous and natural to divide a circle in 4. And if you divide the circle in 4, you have 4 times 90 degrees.
But how do you not have 4 times 14 degrees?
Well, 4 times 25. 4 times 25, you've got a decimal system.
I agree with you guys, but if you have a circle, do you have the spontaneously, you would divide it in 2, and after that you would divide it in 2. That would be, in my understanding, the most spontaneous action.
Yeah, the easiest.
Agreed. But then why would you associate the internal angles to be 180 and 180 instead of 50 and 50, or 30 and 30 or something?
Oh, very easy, Matt. If you divide a circle in 2, you have 180 at the bottom and 180 above the horizontal time.
But you don't know that yet.
Just a label. You don't know that. It could be 50. You could nominate it to be anything you want.
Yeah.
Why 60? What's the 60 based on? What's that whole counting system based on?
I have another spontaneous hypothesis. The month is about 30 days.
That's a bit better.
So
yeah.
It's very natural. It's because people of ancient times noticed that the moon is coming back more or less at the same position or the same appearance after 30 days.
That's right.
So
that's
28 days. Yeah.
That's very satisfying.
Cycle.
And there's approximately 360 days in a year. Not exactly,
but approximately. But that's the difficult thing, right? Because it's like not exactly that.
Yeah, it has been.
And close enough year after year to be available and amenable to a simple adjustment.
Yeah,
exactly.
Which they were aware of. They were very much aware of. Yes,
absolutely. It has been the adventure of mathematics and astronomy since the last 6,000 years. But from the very beginning,
earlier. Yes.
And earlier. Okay, I won't satisfy your taste for Atlantis, Paul. But I would say from the most primitive people a long time ago, they already got the general answer.
So it's good for us to replicate what they must have been thinking about as an exercise. And this is all good. This is a good thing to do. And I like the fact that you zeroed in on the obvious case of the moon and the cycles of the moon to guide us. That's a good point. All right. So that's one concept, one many infinite, and how to think about the boundary conditions that our mind has to choose and select when we're zeroing in on making sense of the reality outside of us that we're born into. Number 2, as a concept, quantization of space, which we've been alluding to. So we know from the from having just all been experienced on some degree Kepler's work that the first degree, the first model that Kepler generated in 1594 of the reason, the causal reason for the organization of the solar system and the positioning of the planets in those positions that we find them, instead of some other imagined possible set of relationships, we find them in the relationships that we find them. Why? He reviewed Timaeus, and he cites in his Mysterium Cosmographicum the influence of Timaeus and Plato that put forth this incredible hypothesis of both the musicality of the harmony of the spheres, right? The musicality of the spheres but also the relationships of the 5 regular Platonic solids, of which Kepler discovered the dodecahedron, as far as I'm aware. It seems like that's why they call it the 5 Platonic solids, because he capped it off by working through, as part of the research project affiliated with his academy, the construction of the dodecahedron, around which the other 4 solids could be derived if one were able to construct, using the golden section, the pentagon, and thus discover that 12 pentagon faces connected together can wrap in volume to create the dodecahedron, and you could
Excuse me.
Huh?
How many sides does a dodecahedron have?
12 faces of 12 pentagons.
Sorry,
yeah.
Okay.
Yep. And so what Kepler generated is his first model of the nesting. So he found that with these 5, and there can only be 5 and not 6, not 4, but 5 Platonic solids, he found that there's a reasonable way that is not arbitrary to nest them within each other. It's good to think about, well, why can there only be 5 and not 4, not 6 or 7, but 5 such Platonic solids that satisfy these criteria? What does that say about the nature of reality, that there can be only 5 and not infinite? Interesting point. So Kepler generated this model. It's an elegant model. And internally, what you have is on the right side, those are the internal planets. So outside, or basically you have outside of the dodecahedron, you have the spherical shell representing Mars. Inside of, between the dodecahedron and icosahedron, you have Earth. Between the icosahedron and the octahedron, in the center there, you have Venus. Inside the octahedron, you have Mercury and then the Sun. And then on the left side are the outer planets beyond Mars, Saturn, Jupiter. So then, outside there, you have the tetrahedron separating Mars from Saturn, and then creating certain relationships and distances. And outside of the tetrahedron, he places the cube, representing Jupiter at the very furthest distance, which were the only planets that he knew of at the time. Each shell has a different width, right? Not all shells are equal. And at the time, they didn't know. It was not yet discovered that the orbits of the planets were ellipses. It was still thought of that they were circles. But since the circles had the reality is they were ellipses, one could say that the width of the sphere of the shell of the spheres were bigger or smaller based upon what we now know to be the degree of what's called eccentricity, the elongation or more circularity of the ellipses. Some ellipses, like Venus, are very almost circular, but they're still ellipses. Just the foci are very close together, and some of them, like Mercury, are much more are less circular, are much more elliptical. The foci are more separated. And a circle, in that sense, one could think of as being maybe an ellipse where the foci meet at one position, if one wishes to redefine a circle that way. It's an interesting, different way of looking at a circle. Right, so that's one thing Kepler did, but it wasn't satisfying, because Kepler believed in truth, and he wasn't satisfied with the fact that even though his system came very close to what we now know as the actual measurements, using the basis of one astronomical unit being the Earth-Sun relationship, and a certain hypothesis regarding the different distances of the planets based upon their speeds around which they were moving around the sun, and how long it took each planet to make a circular a rotation around the sun. He was able to infer certain distances and speeds of those planets. And again, he was very close. And this is on the what you have there is the real observations versus Kepler's observations in yellow, in red and blue, showcasing a very close degree of symmetry. It's quite astounding for 1594 to come up with something so elegant that matches the observational data pretty closely. It's very nice. But Kepler wasn't satisfied with that, and that's why he needed to create what became his first, or not create, but discover his first two laws of planetary motion in the form of the new astronomy that we looked at the first week we began reading this, and eventually the harmonies of the worlds, which developed his third planetary law, the law that basically consummated his life's mission to prove whether or not Plato was right 2,000 years earlier, and whether the universe is arranged by a composer who made things reasonably and beautifully, or is it an arbitrary universe of chaos that should justify why empires and wars should be natural, right? Because that was ultimately Kepler's motive, was to bring peace to the world by getting humanity to realize that we live in a different kind of universe, which comes through in his writings, that's made by a loving, reasonable creator in whose image we were created. Very fundamental to his whole identity and purpose for doing what he did. So, third concept, and that was the concept introduced there very briefly of oh, my screen just froze on me. Oof. Of quantization of space. Right. So one way of thinking about the quantization of space, we already saw the language and the string being divided. The third core concept is commensurability and incommensurability. So if somebody gave you a curved slope, or let's say a mountain, a very curvy mountain to measure, would you want to go into that with a straight edge ruler? Would that be very successful at getting? Now I see Declan nodding his head, correctly so. Now, so the straight is something that exists. The curved is something that exists. When one measures, one has to use one has to find something similar in its nature to that which is being measured. So one would probably try to find some metric that also contains within it some quality of curvature. Here, there's two quotes. Oh, what's that?
Topology. It's a form of mathematics, is my understanding, that allows you to measure different shapes and surfaces. Mathematically map the shape.
Topology, yes. Yes, topology, yes.
Yeah,
right.
Mathematically map out the shape of a cup, for example.
Yes. Yeah, and you could use things like trigonometry arose out of a desire to try to figure out how do we use concepts of a straight, but also, like the idea of a sine, cosine, tangent. These are concepts that involve straightness, but they're being derived from circular action within a circle. So we're always trying to figure out, how do I triangulate something? How do I use the straight to try to get closer to an idea of a curved area? How is that possible?
Is that related to a topographical map that you're saying?
Topography.
Yeah,
it can be an application, yes.
Yeah, it comes from that, but topology as a form of mathematics, et cetera, is not really based on the topography of, let's say, natural formations.
Yeah, exactly. But it goes back to what Kepler wrote last time. It's the comparison of the two items from the uncorporeal and unlocalized mode.
Yeah.
The circle and what can be inscribed within the circle, the curve and the straight that you're showing now, Matt.
Yeah, exactly. And this will bring us now to the next question of Cusa, because Kepler was also a devout follower of the thinking of a fellow named Nicholas of Cusa, who was a very major political figure, a cardinal, a reformer, a Platonist, who did a lot to try to resolve certain wars He was a key organizer in the Ecumenical Council of Florence that tried to put an end to certain conflicts and schisms that had been set into motion in the 11th century. Cusa was somebody very interesting, and he wrote a lot. Lyndon LaRouche, I wouldn't know of Cusa if I didn't know of LaRouche, and LaRouche had always hammered since the 80s at the importance of reevaluating the role of Cusa in setting the groundwork for modern physical science. And when I began reading Cusa's works, especially his Deducta Ignorantia, but there's a lot of other works that have been translated, it's true. It's actually true. He created the basis of modern physical science. Without him, there would not be that. Also, he created the basis of what became the American Revolution. So the very idea of natural law and creating human law in accordance with God's law that manifested itself in at least the Western world with the Peace of Westphalia and the idea of the Declaration of Independence and Constitution would not have been possible were it not for the work specifically of Cusa and a very close grouping of associates. Very interesting fellow. But so Kepler in his Mysterium writes on this very thing that I think is very important to read right now. He says, it was a matter, he's 23 years old when he's writing this, it was a matter which God created in the beginning. And if we know the definition of it was matter, sorry, it was matter like the literal thing. And if we know the definition of matter, I think it will be very clear why God created matter and not any other thing in the beginning. I say that what God intended was quantity. To achieve it, he needed everything which pertains to the essence of matter, and quantity is a form of matter, in virtue of its being matter and the source of its definition. Now God decided that quantity should exist before all other things, so that there should be a means of comparing a curved with a straight line. For in this one respect, Nicholas of Cusa and others seem to me divine, and they attach so much importance to the relationship between straight and a curved line, and dared to liken a curve to God, a straight line to his creatures. And those who tried to compare the Creator to his creatures, God to man, and divine judgments to human judgments, did not perform much more valuable a service than those who tried to compare a curve with a straight line, a circle with a square. And although under the power of God this alone would have been enough to constitute the appropriateness of quantities and the nobility of a curve, yet to this was also added something else which is far greater, the image of God, the three in one, in a spherical surface, that is, of the Father in the center, the Son in the surface, and the Spirit in the regularity of the relationship between the point and the circumference. For what Nicholas of Cusa attributes to the circle, others, as it happens, have attributed to the globe, but I reserve it solely for a spherical surface. Again, his idea of quantity, of number, of matter is very different from a lot of the materialists of the modern age who do not think on this level. We're going to look more into this. But now just a word from Cusa. So in 1440 something, he died in 1460. He wrote On Learned Ignorance. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful book. It's so dense and so good. It's available, like I said. I'll make a link available in the description box. But he makes a point here in this one little section I pulled out. Whatever is not truth cannot measure truth precisely. Right? So we have to have, if we're going to discover truth outside of us, we have to have a quality of that truth within us by which we measure and judge our discovery to be true. By comparison, a non-circle cannot measure a circle, whose being is something indivisible. Hence, the intellect, which is not truth, never comprehends truth so precisely that truth cannot be comprehended infinitely more precisely. For the intellect is to truth as an inscribed polygon is to the inscribing circle. The more angles the inscribed polygon has, the more similar it is to the circle. However, even if the number of its angles is increased ad infinitum, the polygon never becomes equal to the circle unless it is resolved into an identity with the circle. Do people understand what he means there?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just to make it visceral, very clear. As you know, there's a relationship between two shapes, right? The square and the circumscribing circle. And if you keep on adding sides to the square, you can get an octagon, a 16-agon, a 32-agon, and you can keep on getting you can get a 64-agon, and you can get a million-agon. And it'll always look closer and closer and closer. It'll actually approximate the circle to the point that the eyes are fooled. And an eye looking at a 10,000-sided polygon would not probably be able to differentiate that from a circle. And yet the ontological reality is that it's further and further removed from a circle. If a circle were defined as that which has the shape which has no sides, right? So if you keep on actually adding sides to getting a zillion sides, you're now ever further removed in truth from that thing that you think you're coming closer to, which is an interesting paradox, an interesting irony. Right. So the other thing that Cusa also innovates, that's something we're going to get at within this reading, is the minimum maximum principle. So when drawing a circle, what the hell are we looking at? Is it a thing? Is it a noun? Or is it a process of creation? Do we think of it as a verb? What is going on in our mind when we look at the circle? Do people know what I'm talking about there as the two choices? I see you nodding there with a grin, Helen. What do
You can't hear me. Yeah, it's interesting. I never thought of it like that. I think of it as a noun. I never thought of it as a process, I guess.
Me neither. Because you think about it like from a standpoint of a child who plays with circles and blocks, and you're trying to get the blocks through the circular hole. It doesn't work. You need a circular cylinder to go through the circular hole as a kid, playing. But it's a thing, right? The circle is a toy. It's a thing. We see a CD or the moon. We just see the image. But if you think about a circle, it's something which you have to create. As anybody, we've all been playing with our compass. We've all been drawing circles. So if you think about it as the shadow of an action of rotation, it gets you into a creation verb place. So what you're seeing is actually a circumference and a center that is created and that's the shadow of an action out of which we can derive, and we know certain things like the distance, the radius, or the diameter. Same thing here for the sphere, right? If you take that circle and you rotate that circle around an axis, right? You can imagine that circle rotating. That two-dimensional circle is now all of a sudden filling up a three-dimensional space. So it's now you got a volume. So what would be the minimum maximum principle being expressed in the circle and the sphere? Anybody have any hypotheses? There's not just one answer. There's a few ways of looking at this.
Can you repeat that question?
In what way would the minimum maximum principle, where would there be a minimum and where would there be a maximum within both concepts of the circle and of the sphere?
Well, you have a point, like you have points in the center of the circle, and you can put points anywhere in and around the circle. Is one thing, I think.
I'm thinking just a slice as opposed to, like you said, the sphere, as it fills in.
Well, maybe going back to what Matthew just said, that the circle is not a fixed object, but is the result of an action. So we can make a rapprochement between the concept of action and the shadow of that action, okay? So what would be the minimum action needed to produce a certain shadow, being the maximum shadow that we can get?
Oh, like the moon.
Yes. The moon, wow, not the moon, wow. The movement of
whatever
has been the shadows, okay, what we see with our sense of perceptions. And what would be behind that, the causality or the causal mechanism that we would try to discover.
Yep. Yeah, because you could imagine the moon would take you could get an idea of rotational action by thinking about the moon moving around the Earth, perhaps, or Definitely.
So what are you saying? Like the moon could be a point in the sky, and it also its orbit
I mean, that's
is
one
a
example. That's
circle.
one way of looking at it.
Yeah.
But really, I mean, it's there's so many ways of looking at it. A simple way would just be to think if you have the maximum let's say we were looking at a 10,000 sided polygon, right? That would such that we had to construct it by literally moving a micro nanometer and then changing our angular trajectory and going another micro nanometer and another micro nanometer 10,000 times to get that thing we're looking at. If we had to do that, would that be a lot of effort or an easy thing to do?
That's a lot of work.
A lot of friggin' work, right? So much work. But let's say we just like rotated a string with a rock at the end of it, and we got that same thing, right? With our hand at the center. Well, all of a sudden that's much easier than having to like measure out or just measuring out 10,000 different angular micro nanometers. The which one would cover a bigger surface area? If you measure the surface area, would it be the rotational action of what I just described, or would it be the 10,000 sided polygon that's changing its angle as it's moving around?
I'm going with the rotation.
Yeah, that would be.
I'm going with the
You're totally right. That would be the biggest. And even if you had a million or a billion or a zillion sided polygon, it would always it would cover a bigger surface area, but it would never be bigger or even as big as the simple rotation. So what Cusa would say is that it would be the circle creates the maximum effect with the minimum action. That the minimal amount of effort to create that action of circularity, of rotation, gets the biggest outcome, the biggest effect, the biggest surface area. And same, if you were to apply that then to the question of the bubble or the sphere, one could say it's the maximum surface area that captures the maximum, or sorry, the minimum surface area that captures the maximum volume of space within it. Any other volume, whether cube or octagon or anything you selected, would have a less economical use of this space relative to the external boundary conditions than a simple sphere would. A sphere is the minimum surface area, maximum volume. And the idea of the economy of nature is something which emerged very much out of these inquiries, right? That nature doesn't waste effort, that there's something built into the fabric of space-time itself, which yearns for creating the best outcome, the best of all possible pathways, right? Why would light select when it moves from one medium to another and it refracts? Why does it select of all possible infinite choices the refraction that we see based upon the density of the new medium, right? When it goes through from air to water, for example, it bends. Why? And there again would be the question of the minimum maximum principle, that it selects of all possible choices that which has the least resistance and the best effect to move from point A to point B through space. So this idea definitely has manifestations when thinking about human economic practice. Very important.
If light is going through a solid, say, it would either it would slow down, or if it doesn't slow down, it's just taking more angles through that solid surface.
It would refract, wouldn't it?
And that's why it would bend, I think.
Is that the process we're thinking of here, Matt? Refraction?
Refraction, yeah.
Yep. And
so it's either slowing down, or it's
refracting,
it's just taking a longer time to go through,
or it's refracting.
Yep.
Which means that it's hitting surfaces and kind of splitting off, even
bouncing around
at predictable angles.
Yep, exactly.
Think of a game of snooker and the physics involved in that. It's exactly the same thing, only on a
except snooker
scale.
keeps you generally in one medium. Maybe if you were moving from a cloth pool table to
Yeah,
a
yeah.
stone pool table, you'd find the ball moving at a different speed. You'd go
Yes,
faster with
exactly.
the stone. Yeah.
Yeah. I was about to describe that analogy as my two-dimensional version of a three-dimensional reality. Anyway.
Yeah. Here. Take it. All right. And yeah, quick example, since again we're talking about Kepler, and Kepler's the guy who discovered the elliptical nature of the orbits of planetary motion. Ellipses are another example. Where would the minimum maximum principle be on an ellipse, for example? Where would we find this minimum maximum expression located?
At the extremes of the ellipse.
In what way?
Exactly.
In space or in time?
Oh, good
Or
question.
both?
Both.
Yeah, both. Yeah.
Yeah. Perihelion and aphelion in space, but in time when the speed change.
Yep. And where would the speed be changing the most, or where would it be going fastest? The planet.
Would be perihelion.
Perihelion, aphelion. Yes.
Yep.
Perihelion. Hey, Matt, I have a question. Kepler managed to make his calculation for the elliptic orbits because of the excellent data collected by Tycho Brahe.
Yeah.
But I would say that would be the is it because the merit of Kepler would be to dare to publish those results, to dare to follow the truth rather than to be prisoner of the idea that the thing is more there.
Yeah, I mean, he was
just to give back a little bit data.
Just to give back a little bit what?
A little bit merit to Tycho Brahe. And in the sense that well, first, I think that chances play a role too, because Tycho Brahe was a little bit jealous of Kepler. He didn't want to give everything. He just gave the data for Mars. But destiny made that Mars had one of the most eccentric orbit. So it was easy to see that it was not circular, but elliptical. But at the same time, I suppose that the merit from Kepler is rather to respect the reality and not to be scared by the fact that most of the people of his time wanted a circle as trajectory, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, I
perfect
think
harmony.
It's important to just keep in mind, yeah, like Tycho is a really great, honorable, honest scientist who did a lot of really good data collection, but he lacked a sort of quality that Kepler did have. And in Tycho's system, he never really broke with the underlying axioms of the standard model of the day. So what you have were, if you wanted to be a respectable careerist in academia and with good, respectable social standing in the professional world, you had to accept certain unquestioned axioms of astronomy. Absolutely, you couldn't break from them. And number one was the existence, the nature of perfect circles being the shape of the planetary orbits that you had to accept. Otherwise, it was heresy. And number two was the idea that, well, that there had to be these little mathematically invisible moments called epicycles around which these invisible spots called epicycles around which the planets moved on a bigger cycle around whatever configuration you wanted to create, whether you placed the Earth in the center the way Ptolemy did, or whether you placed the sun in the Earth in the center the way Tycho did, because Tycho also placed the Earth in the center, but he then just said all of the other planets go around the sun, which goes around the Earth, which doesn't move. So it's very creatively inflexible and capable of breaking with those core axioms, whereas Kepler didn't have that creative block. He had a stronger love for truth, and that really gave him an edge that was lacking. And even Copernicus there, which we have in the middle, though Copernicus had the more reasonable decision to place the sun near the center. In the Copernican system, as Kepler proves, it's not that different from the other two, because you could remove the sun from the Copernicus model and nothing changes. Because in fact, everything goes around a little invisible spot called an equant near the sun, which is the center of his system, not the sun itself. The sun plays no role in Copernicus' system.
Yeah,
So
exactly. But I would say that above the fact that Kepler probably has a greater soul, I think that he has also been psychologically prepared from his earlier work of Mysterium Cosmographicum, published in 1596, I think. So he was more capable to break the taboo, if you want, because not only had he a higher soul, but he has been prepared psychologically for more than 20 years between 1596 and 1619.
Yeah, you're totally right. Yeah, he had to gear himself up. he didn't out of the soup like that. So those are the core concepts that we're going to encounter today. So let's just jump on with the reading here, so we'll be able to get through as much of this as humanly possible. Here it is. Do people see the chapter 3 here?
Yes.
Okay. So who would like to read today? Anyone?
I could read.
All right, do it.
All right. Chapter 3. What are the types of the harmonized, that is, of the things, whether sensible or immaterial, in which the harmonies have been expressed, whether by God or man, and in what way?
Occasionally, I will read these little side things. Occasionally, those are important to just like serve as the sub themes of what's in the paragraph.
Okay. All right. It is easily seen that there are distinct questions. 1. In what do the harmonies exist as agent, shaper, or creator? 2. In what do they exist as the creation which is shaped? We have dealt with the former so far. We must now further deal more precisely with the latter. All things, then, are either immaterial or participate in matter. The soul is immaterial in relation to the body, and as we have maintained up to this point, has wholly, in relation to its essence, been designed by God in the harmonic proportions, and those which were previously in the mind as their creator, that is, inasmuch as it is an activity, are now in the mind because it is a creation of God. Now, what participates in matter also at the same time participates in number and magnitude. But a consequence in magnitude is a position in space. Finally, local motion is attributed to them. Therefore, number is something prior by nature to harmony, because the terms of each harmony must be more than one in number. However, the number of the primary bodies of the world also has its cause in geometry, which I repeat below in Book 5 from my Mysterium Cosmographicum, the secret of the universe. A consequence of quantity is shape, its individual property, and why a global shape was necessary for the stars, and so for the world itself, that is as a result of the archetype of the spherical. Is generally explained at various points elsewhere. An immediate consequence of the shape of different bodies is a definite proportion, and that in 3 ways: 1 in their diameters, another in their surfaces, and a third in their volume or bodies. Therefore, if no other causes for the proportions were forthcoming, we should probably be able to affirm that they had been taken from the harmonies. Yet whatever they are, the celestial globes preserve them without any change, seeing that they do not become larger or smaller by any motion or lapse of time. It is otherwise in the case of those proportions which belong to bodies on account of their position and because of the local motions, for they retain the character of the motion itself, and as it is in a state of continual becoming, it is never occupied in being. Similarly, the proportions of motions are not constant and are different at different times. It is indeed true that if the motion of the celestial bodies did not produce variation in their distances from their common starting line or the original state of the world, that is, they had no motion upwards or downwards, but it was all in a pure concentric circle. In that case, not only would the proportion of the distances have been constant, but it would also have been purely harmonic if no other causes had been forthcoming. The same has to be said of the motion, the cause of their essence, that is, the cause of their true speed through the ether. If it were constant and perpetual in individual cases, there is no doubt that these speeds or slownesses of the various bodies would have been attuned to harmonic laws. Lastly, the same has also to be said of the same motion on account of the enclosed space which is apparent beneath the zodiac. For if it had been necessary for all the planets to proceed with the same apparent motion under the zodiac and never be further separated from one another, there is no doubt that God would from the beginning have established their position relatively to each other under the zodiac, if in fact his disposition of them had been unrestricted and not linked to other laws of necessity, in a way that would split up the zodiac in harmonic ratios. In fact, it is generally agreed that was the case of at the start of the motions, since the start of time is considered without reference to time, so that from their common position and harmonic configuration, as it could have appeared either from Earth or rather from the Sun, as if in front of starting gates, each departed into their own spaces or paths. But because the planets move upwards and downwards, changing the distances between their positions, and because as well as this motion, it follows by physical necessity that there is also a real intention and remission of their motions on account of their speed. And lastly, because through the unequal apparent speeds of the different planets in the area of the zodiac, which they seem to traverse, is divided differently at different times. For these three reasons, the same thing happens both to their positions and to their motions through time as to the actual quantities without reference to time.
So far, so good. Is the language okay for people so far? Yeah. Okay. Even though you could map everything, all the motions of the planets against the sort of spherical celestial sphere, with like we just saw in the PowerPoint, right? You could divide that sphere into 12. You wouldn't find that the planet, if you're looking at the motion of Jupiter, which takes I think 30 years to do one rotation, when it moves through 1/12 of the sphere, and then you compare it to another zodiac, another arc of 1/12 of that celestial sphere, it won't take the same amount of time. It's going to be different based upon the fact that it's moving faster or slower based upon its relationship to the sun, right? So there's this inconsistency. So if they were all perfect, if everything was just a perfectly distanced position from the sun and everything was moving constantly, there would just be perfect harmony all the time. But we don't have that.
Okay.
We have impurities, dissonances as well. Things are moving.
So what you're saying is there would be like no change.
Not
right?
really.
You would just do the same thing all the time.
Perfect.
Under the Copernican system.
The reality is there is dissonance, right? It's a good way to also have that in the back of the mind when thinking about the nature of like evil, because people would say, well, God must not exist because evil exists, or God must be evil because he made evil, or something like that, But Kepler's introducing this question of how harmony and disharmonies are necessary to create the best outcome. Not to say that evil is necessary and good. He doesn't mean that either. But these are always the metaphysical questions that Kepler and Plato are always working on the back of their minds when you have to read things like this.
Did he mention something about the planets being or becoming? Something to do with their motion?
Not the planets. Well, yeah, he was saying that that the planets are in a perpetual state of change, of becoming. They're never in a state of being, which is the state where things don't change. They're in
okay, so it's just what you said, basically.
Yeah, once things are set in motion.
Yeah. Well, here becoming has to be understood at the phenomena, okay, what you can see with the sense of perceptions, and the possible disharmonies that you could see, and there being will come into account, because it's with being that you would go behind the scenes and discover the mechanics producing the becoming precisely.
Yeah. Exactly. Cool. You wanna pick it up again, Declan?
Yeah, I think it was a little farther down.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, I think we're for just as the terms or makers of the harmonic ratios are not on the whole circle or on a straight line and all its points, but in fact on certain of them, so also in this case the harmonies cannot exist in the whole time of the motion, nor in the distances, nor in the speed of the motions, nor in the areas of the zodiac intercepted between the planets. However, they can exist completely at certain moments of time, and they can do that without any further operation by God, once the motion has been started. For if he has prescribed the extremes of the motions, and has granted them the favor of changing from one extreme to another, he has also bestowed on them all the intermediate points, both the incongruent ones which are infinite, and the ones which are congruent and harmonious, interspersed in a definite number between the incongruent. For God has not left them changeable without any care for the display of harmony. Rather, he has reduced some of them, such as the proper motions of the planets, to harmonic order by prescribing their extremes, which will be the subject matter of Book 5. In other cases, where the extremes are not laid down, but the quantity of the motion in a circle is interrelated with itself, the Creator deemed it sufficient to shape souls, which control earthly creatures, in such a way that they expected and observed and noticed the harmonies all round the circle, as they occurred at their own moments over time, and fitted their own doings to the prescription of the harmonies. That is the case with the apparent motions of the planets beneath the zodiac as seen from the earth, the proper subject matter of this book 4.
This one is called In Music, Difference Between Celestial Harmonies and Human Music.
With the works of God known to us, then, it is as follows. If we now compare with them the works which men ordain in accordance with harmonic laws, we shall have to say that they are partly the same and partly different. First, though in song continuous increase and decrease in quantity are possible no less than in the heaven, yet in the motions of the heaven it is necessary to by definite law of nature. But to the human voice it is neither necessary nor even easy. For the throat is made to produce indefinable notes by various sizes of circle. We pass more easily from high to low, and the other way around by leaping, so to speak, over intervals and separate sounds, than if we were instructed to use continuous intention. Therefore, it is nothing surprising if the celestial motions, with actual continuous increase and decrease, which could not be avoided, there also remained unmelodic intervals mixed with melodic and consonant ones, whereas in human music, all the unmelodic intervals are eliminated and only melodic and consonant ones are admitted.
He didn't know about heavy metal yet.
That's good, man.
industrial death metal,
Yeah.
and 45 flavors besides.
That's funny. For those who charged with another duty to perform, harmonic tuning is for them only ancillary. Music has nothing but the harmonies to keep in view, and seeks for nothing beyond it. It is directed to the sole aim of giving delight.
And this
was
was
interesting.
Yeah, go on. Yeah.
I just thought it was interesting the way he said how we obviously jump from different pitches and different harmonies in the way we speak or the way we sing, and how hard it would be to actually you had to do a continuous. You had to talk, but you had all the different inflections of your voice had to be continuous. That would be. I can't imagine talking like that. That would be so hard.
I can't imagine talking like that. I guess that's it's true, eh?
Yeah.
We could painfully try, but no, yeah, we have these discrete leaps that we make over intervals where we select certain frequencies when we speak versus a planetary motion, which is just one continuous gradient of change without really making those leaps in its orbit. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it makes it interesting. It's an elegant way to talk about the seeming chaos of the world sometimes.
Yeah.
That you're jumping between the discordant parts to get to the harmonious parts.
Yeah. Yeah, it's nice, eh? And I guess at his time too, this is before Bach started playing with dissonances. In Kepler's time, it wasn't really explored the use of dissonances responsibly deployed within a because you have like the Beethoven dissonance quartet, and there are cases now where we find dissonances playing a positive role, but subsumed within a higher concord. Unlike the case I took a jab at heavy metal, which is all dissonance. No resonance.
In Bach's time and the development before it was stepping stones between consonances. That's what the dissonances were. Yeah,
absolutely. Hey, but
a leading tone that suddenly gets harmonized with its own chord, which happens to involve a dissonant note that gets resolved onto the next chord.
Yeah.
And once it starts, that leads you all the way through to Wagner, for example. Tristan and Isolde, where you never have a key center, and thereafter tonal music starts to break down, and we get Arnold Schoenberg.
Yeah. But remember what John Play said last time about the quantization of the redshift, of the intrinsic redshift. Maybe there's a solution there.
Good point. That's a very.
Could you say there's? Could you say there's?
Sorry, Kelly. Go ahead.
I was gonna say, could you say there's dissonance in the universe or in the motion because we don't understand it yet, and once we understand it, then it would be harmonic?
Well, we don't understand all the details like the elliptical law, like the law of planetary motion discovered by Kepler. It seems strange before Kepler, but after Kepler, it was obvious that the solution is very simple and elegant.
But that's why it could be displeasing to us because we don't understand it.
Absolutely. I mean,
and it doesn't fit with the prevailing power paradigm.
Exactly.
Or what we're used to.
That's the cognitive dissonance. Okay, that's the cognitive dissonance. Sure. And precisely, there's a very easy rapprochement that we can make with politics. Okay, because if someone is drowned in a certain narrative, it would provoke a certain cognitive dissonance if we are telling to that person some truth that is not digestible within the narrative that person has accepted.
Of course, yeah.
And the same for science. Stuff that some phenomena are not pleasant for us because our present framework of explanation is not complex enough to integrate those stuff. But when it wouldn't be integrated, it would appear obvious and natural, as with the planetary movement when Kepler gave his 3 laws.
That would
Well,
explain maybe when we get wiser, we nothing less things bother us.
Absolutely. It would be pure harmony.
ah,
Matt, we can't hear you.
Matt, your micro is off.
Ooh,
He disappeared from my screen.
Okay,
yeah,
now
I
He's
he,
don't.
gone.
now he's frozen from my screen. He
Oh,
got some
started
problem with his internet last week.
Yeah.
Probably it's the
Okay.
same. Okay, he's back now.
okay.
You're muted right now. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Is it okay now?
Yeah,
Yeah,
it's okay.
yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was gonna say this is the times we're living in right now are very similar to the Tycho Brahe issue, who, you know, because we're really good at collecting data, collecting information, but we lack the quality of minds. We lack the Keplers to make sense of the data. So like Tycho was so good at collecting data, but he didn't have the quality inside himself to look for those paradoxes and generate beautiful concepts that could resolve those paradoxes in the form of eurekas. He didn't have it. Kepler did. Thank God. But we're like that too. You just look at what these incredible satellite images of deep space are producing, and you know, as John pointed out, and you just reminded us, the redshifts definitely have. There's not an infinite amount of redshifts that we find with quasars. There's a quantization of like only nine different frequencies of the redshifts of the quasars. Why only nine? Even though we know of millions of quasars, there's only nine. And same thing for the Schumann resonances. There's not infinite possible resonance frequencies between the ionosphere and the Earth's surface. There's only like 12 specific resonance frequencies, you know, around which the most powerful is the 7.6 hertz. The human brain in the alpha state type of resonance that we tend to all talk about. But there's only 12 or so. There's not infinite. Why 12, right? If I'm sure if you deployed the method that we're studying right now by Kepler, which bore such good fruit, we would find so many wonderful solution concepts that today we're being told are unanswerable because we all have to pay homage to dark matter, black holes, Big Bang assumptions, which
Yeah.
there's like nothing to it. It's like epicycles.
Yes.
There's nothing there.
Yeah. Well, I would say that it would be a very interesting epistemological discussion to make the rapprochement between the mindset of Tycho Brahe and Kepler. I'm sure that maybe some new Keplers are having the epiphany moment now that we are speaking.
I sincerely hope so.
Yeah. Well, there's deep thinkers, and then there's people who think correctly. Sometimes if somebody's a deep thinker, they can't see the forest from the trees.
Yeah, they get stuck too deep in the hole that they're digging for themselves.
Yeah, I could be one of those.
I have a little of that. Anyway.
All right, let's keep on trudging through here.
Okay. There are also other human activities into which the mind introduces harmonic proportions, though more obscurely and ignobly, as when music is formed not only by the quality of high or low pitch, but in addition by the rhythmic measure as well, participating in double and triple proportion, and again in the movement of bodies when dances are performed, first in the proportion of equality, and after that in double proportion. Poets also imitate the same thing, by making melodic feet from long and short syllables, the former being taken as double the latter. Thus the iamb, D dum, and trochee, dum D, or the oh my goodness.
Tribrachus.
Tribrachus, which I guess is D D D. Or is the spondy, dum dum, goodness gracious, dactyl, anapessit, or amphibrachus?
Yeah, you're on a roll. You're on a roll. Keep going.
Procellimaticus as 3 to 4, or the Bacchae, the critic, and the peons as 3 to 5, the Molosius, Coriam, and Ionics, and their compounds as 1 to 2. To the same feet, the spondydactyl and those which are which take the same time as them are the 2 to 3, and the same to the peons as 4 to 5, whereas the peons are to the croams and their kin as 5 to 6. Wow. And they lost me way back at the I can't remember what.
One of those cases of we got the gist.
Yeah.
Shakespeare
Indeed.
in his iambic pentameter.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
That's an example of what they're talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's one of the few I actually know. The rest of them are like
Yeah.
Indeed, poets and grammarians also delight in the names of proportions, with their peculiar usage, calling feet or 4 syllables by the short name epitrites, that is 4/3. 4 as the proportion 4 to 3 as expressed by parallel lines. The first 3 units are in fact represented by a double line, and the fourth only by a single additional line. So in the foot there are 3 syllables, 2 units of time, and a fourth of only 1. And as the name feet itself alludes to dances as part of comedies and tragedies, the actors also, by the motion of their feet, seem to have expressed all those proportions, no less than the double and triple proportions are expressed today. In architecture, whatever proportions of length to breadth or thickness are most approved, even by observers who are not mathematical, are found to be as close as possible to harmonic. In fact, the reason why the proportions of sounds are more exact than all of those, and the nature of man delights in their more eager expressions, is that every living thing has sounds, and that has sounds most of all in its power, seeing that they are shaped within it, admitted by its very midriff, and most obedient to every whim of its mind, every movement of its heart, and that, as has been stated before, it has been allotted the most suitable instrument, the throat stretched at full length, like a string, or rather a pipe, and the voice arose up and down with least impediment along the straight line of its length. However, in general, in everything in which quantity and harmonies in accordance with it can be sought, their presence is much more obvious through motion than without motion. For although in any given straight line there are its half, third, quarter, fifth, sixth, and their multiples, yet there are lurking among other parts which are incommensurable with the whole, and one and the same confusion with the whole, concealed in such a way that if in particular a second line equal to 1 of the aliquot parts is placed next to the whole. For for example, a lintel beam of 3 feet next to a doorpost of 5, yet its proportion to the whole will not be easily apparent, as if some motion distinguishes and establishes and determines the comparable lengths. The reason is this, that where there is quantity without a motion in accordance with it, in that case, everything which is present in the quantity is present together at the same time. That is, all the proportions of all its parts to the whole. However, if some quantity is traversed by a certain motion, then, as is the essence of motion, those proportions which have been transversed are not present any more than those which have not been traversed, and do not yet even exist. And any one proportion is the only one present when the motion reaches its location. Thus it comes about by the succession of motions that the harmonic proportions are unwrapped from unmelodic ones, and by separation from mixture with them are established in full view, as it were, in their purity, and proffered for the sense of grasp. In fact, not even the mind itself distinguishes the harmonies for the harmonic proportions in a given quantity from the infinity of unmelodic ones standing before and after without some image of motion. But when, to take the example of a circle, an infinity of chords has been traversed, it operates in the chords subtended by a third or a quarter of the circle, and similar ones, and seeks for its construction. It evinces by contemplation what the hand evinces by drawing a line, the actual separation of that one from the infinity of others, which have not been contemplated and not been drawn, and the observation by the mind of its congruence or incongruence apart from the others. The mind, indeed, can do that because it employs the will and dances by its own decision on that infinite division of quantities, the whole of which is present simultaneously to the mind for contemplation. On the other hand, the sensations and the other natural perceptions, and indeed the bodily motions by which the perceptions are assisted, are not under the control of a living creature in such a way that that's
a tough one, eh?
Its infinite sounds, or the infinite angles separating a pair of planets on their way around the circle, were mixed up with each other at the same time. They can withdraw from the unacceptable ones and retreat only to those which are pleasing. They therefore need motion, and with its intervention, everything which has been mixed up as far as quantity was concerned will be sorted out through the sequence of time, so that it is presented individually to the senses on its own. But if the eyes are capable of anything like the mind, so that from a single infinite confusion of things which are present without motion they pick out the more important, as if by using the assistance of the hands they pick out the infinite possible chords of a circle and sketch out the chords subtended by a third of it, that is the side of a triangle, and that very thing should be considered as done not so much by the eyes as by the mind itself through the eyes. And this is clearly not without motion of the hands, as I have said. Then to apply this observation to the previous pronouncements, there must, if something is to be the genuine subject of the harmonic proportions, there must, I say, be both a quantity, that is a length, in that thing, and two reference points at least, if the length is a circle, or three, if it is a straight line, or of which either one or all pass over the length of the thing by some motion and become the terminal points of the parts of its length between which there is a proportion, and that as a minimum. And that, what's that? I'm trying to picture that. I was just trying to picture that. How does that work?
Can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, cool. My computer said I can't be heard. Could you reread it? Just because my screen just froze on me, and I
it was up a bit. It was a little part of that paragraph.
Here?
Where they're talking about this. Yeah, the 2 points at least, if the length of the circle, or 3 if it is a straight line. And I'm trying to construct that in my head.
Okay, let's reread that, because my screen did freeze a little bit as you were reading that part. Okay. So let's review that from let's reread from then. And it starts with how sensible things should have been compared for there to be harmonies in them.
Okay. Then to apply this observation to the previous pronouncements, there must, if something is to be the genuine subject of the harmony and harmonic proportions, there must, I say, be both a quantity, that is a length, in that thing, and two reference points at least, if the length is a circle, or three if it is a straight line, of which either one or all pass over the length of the thing by some motion and become the terminal points of the parts of its length between which there is a proportion, and that as a minimum.
It's a good question, eh? What?
Yeah, please explain.
Yeah. Two reference points if the length is a circle, or three if it is a straight line, of which either one or all pass over the length of the thing by some motion.
When I think of
but
the
Matt,
circle,
sorry, go ahead. Go ahead.
when I think of the circle and two reference points, I can't help it. I immediately go with the diameter and the radius as a way of defining the 2 points necessary, beginning end, to construct a circle. But I'm struggling to find three reference points for a straight line.
Well, that's the thing, right? The circle as well. You could have like the center and the circumference, and then you have, what you need to play with a circle.
Sure.
A straight line.
You can define it by those 2 points, but defining a straight line in reference to 3 points,
well, I think that we have to go back to chapter 1, okay, when he made the difference between the sensible harmonies and the intelligible harmonies. And here it's another way to talk about the intelligible harmonies. If you remember, you have three things in the definition of the intelligible harmonies, because let's not forget the title of this chapter 3 is the types of the harmonized things, okay? Either sensible or intelligible. But here we are in the intelligible one.
Sorry to interrupt.
Go ahead, Bob.
Just for a second, a reference to some of the prose a little bit earlier than what we're looking at the moment was referring to the 3 times structure involved in music. Well, that would be triads used in the harmonic foundations.
I think I have the idea. If you have any string which is a straight line, and you want to get a harmony, you place a division somewhere along that string to make 2 parts, right? Like, well, all of a sudden you have now. Makes sense. Yeah, now you have the 2 parts as they relate to each other and to the whole. So
yeah.
And then so that's 3 things, right? So the 2 endpoints of the string, your point in the middle, and now you have 3 sounds as well as 3 points, the edges of the string and the point that you just made in the middle, that create these proportions that are relatable.
And
of course, and I'll be a smart ass and go straight for the geometric mean, of course. How old proportion? 1.618. Yeah, the golden mean.
That's a pretty one.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's a good image to have. All of a sudden, that 3-point thing makes perfect sense, Matt.
Yeah.
Yes, for a line.
Yeah, for a line, yeah. Or for defining any relationship between the line and any point on the line.
Yeah, and for a circle, you just need 2 spots to have the segment of circle or the arc making a sound.
Yep. Yeah. Good point.
And but once again, I'm a little bit obsessed by that. But maybe it's another way to express that famous comparison with intelligible objects, as he defined. Okay, meaning once again the circle and the arcs of circle and the different line going through that circles, defining the polygons in 2D space or in 3D spaces.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you're right.
As defined in chapter 2.
Yeah, you're totally right. And keep in mind, this is what he was just dealing with in the previous paragraph, was the question of the incommensurability, like the infinite spectrum of sound, and the fact that the mind can detect the mind and the ear work together with the eye, in the case of geometries of circles, can detect certain proportions out of the infinity, which we deem to be quantized, beautiful, concordant, consonant. And we have will, right? So that depends upon, like, even now there's an infinite spectrum of light entering into our eyes and infinite spectrums of sound entering into our ears, but we are choosing to give our attention to very specific things in the visual and audible domain, right? And guide our mind in an inquiry. So it's the same thing that he's been dealing with here now, giving it a more practical sense to it.
Example. He want to give an example of some shadows for the principle. I just want to take 10 seconds to read the title of the chapter 3 again. What are the types of the harmonized? That is, of the things, whether sensible or immaterial, in which the harmonies or the harmonic proportions have been expressed, whether by God or man, and in what way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, well, there's a lot of those around.
Yeah, there are like 3 items, okay? The harmonic expressed in sensible things or in immaterial or intelligible things, by God or man. 2, in what way? 3.
Mm-hmm.
Well, start with DNA.
I thought you wanted to speak about Atlantis, Paul.
Well, okay. DNA, Atlantis, the Sumerians, the Anunnaki. I mean, you know, stories and stories, etc., etc. You know, Sitchin, blah 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 blah. So we're already touching on it. I'm sorry, mate.
That's a whole nother topic.
Exactly.
Shall we proceed onward?
Okay. And that comes about in the part, in the configurations, which are the proper subject of this book 4. For as will be stated in the following chapter, the harmonies, indeed the angles which the zodiac measures out, are considered without motion. But the actual angles, one giving place to another, are established by the motion of the radiating bodies through the zodiac. However, there are more important processes which tend toward the same result, as when bodies themselves, which have length, are bound by such reference points which rove up and down, and their stumps, which have been cut off by some vicissitude, move at the same time. Thus, not the bodies in this case, but the actual motions of the bodies with respect to length and breadth, which is not temporal but corporeal, in fact, a kind of motion placed in the bodies, or bodies established in motion, are compared with each other. It is like that with sounds, for a sound is as emanation given out of a body, and in accordance with its size, and to the certain extent how it is shaped and how it is established in motion. For both motion and sound depend on what suits the shape. And this again is another and more obvious reason why the nature of man is devoted most of all to harmonic proportions in sound. For once again, this is due to the shaping of the body. In it, the throat is that body which is in accordance with the tightening of the upper or lower circle of gristle in the rough windpipe. Is now long, now short, and which, driven by the breath expelled from the bellows of the lungs by its concavity, in other words, its shape, gives out a similar motion, the emancipation of which reaches the ears, and also the sensation of the actual windpipe, as it is established in the motion, is present to the sentient soul. Of course, sensing by the common sense is to partake in the emanation of the organs of the body, as are influenced and, so to speak, shaped by different motions. Those emanations, as I have explained in the diopatries, are carried by the continuum of spirits from the organs of the body, even if they are at distance to the seat of the common sense. It therefore comes about that as a man, by the frequent sensation of his rough windpipe established in motion, absorbs a certain idea of the shaping of bodies which are in any way sounding, he recognizes all the more easily, as it were judges, the shaping of bodies outside himself which are in motion, and emitting sounds by that motion, and examines them in comparison with each other according to the laws of harmonic proportions.
And that was subtitled How the Mind of Man Judges from Sound the Quantity of Things Which Are Sounding. So we have just investigated now harmony as it's expressed in God, man, and how that all works. That's a pretty big task we just accomplished. This book, by the way, that's being referenced is really good. Kepler's, they call it here optics. Kepler calls it dioptrous. I guess that's the Latin. Really good read. I think it's like $100 to buy online though. It's still worth owning in the library. It's really, really dense and full of good philosophy as well. But yeah, this was the next section here is going to be Chapter 4, what the distinction is between the harmonies considered in the 4th book and those considered in the 3rd book. And what we're going to do next week, we'll read this chapter, and then when that's done, I'm going to expect that people take the time themselves to read this gigantic Chapter 4 on their own time. On the causes of the influential configurations and the degrees of the number and order. This one is a little bit more, it's important but grueling, and it's a lot of definitions and postulates written in sort of a Euclidean style, but it is anti-Euclidean. Just going through basically discoverable qualities of the planetary motions around from the Earth's point of view, because he's really getting at, he's intervening on the superstition of his day, which sort of contaminated the minds of most educated people and uneducated around astrology. And wars were made based on the decisions of astrologers, which is sort of like the, you can see how that could be manipulated by oligarchs to get superstitious, well-meaning, useful idiots to give money for keys in when God and the planets want them to go to war with their neighbors or have an alliance with another kingdom or duke or something, you know. Very useful to keep people in that state of mind, and Kepler is intervening on that in a big way. So this is going to be something people could check through on their own, and then we'll jump back in with the reading.
Where can you be more specific? What is it that you want us to read again?
Oh, this chapter here, which goes through all the propositions. It's huge.
And you sent out the links to
where is that at?
To read this, or do we?
Yeah, everyone has the links. It's chapter 5 of book 4, and everyone has the PDF of book 4.
Yeah, look for the first email in this series. The PDF should be there.
Oh, they're in every single email. There's a link in every email to download.
And also the problems we were working on.
Yeah.
I didn't write them all down. Is there a link to that too?
Nathan, are you on are you on the Telegram geometry group?
I don't think I am.
Are you on Telegram?
I don't know. Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay.
So I can get on there.
Well,
Okay.
you can send me a message, a personal message,
Okay.
and then I'll put you in my contacts and make sure you're in the Telegram geometry group. And that way,
Okay, and then I can
yeah, you'll be able to follow the specific problems. And then what I ask everyone to do is throughout the week, send me a photograph of the things you're working on and make very clear the steps you've been taking. And then that way, you know, we bring them up typically before we read and talk about what people have tried to do, what they've been working on. And this week, you know, the two things that I mentioned at the beginning to I guess animate our investigation for the next 7 days will be try to prove the Pythagorean theorem. Why does a squared plus b squared equal c squared on a right angle triangle? Any right angle triangle. Try to come up with some geometric proofs, not mathematical, geometric, so I could see visually what's physically going on. Try to figure out if the radius of any shape within a circle is 1, right? What would the side of the square be? What would the side of the triangle be, or any other shape that you could come up with? What would that be?
Okay, and the parameters for doing this, I mean, I can't just pick up a old algebra book. I want to think conceptually, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So,
like, don't grab
if
a
I have the
compass.
time to do the problems first, I'll just do the reading, and then I'll work on the problem.
Yeah, don't worry about the. Yeah, I mean, you could refer back to the previous recordings, but all you need is a compass and a straight edge to connect points that you make as you're playing with your circle that you've made with your compass with rotational action. You're going to be making divisions at reasonable moments inside of your circle and outside of your circle. And so those divisions you make, you might want to connect them together using your ruler. But that's really all you would do. That's all you need.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. I
Okay.
have a question. So why are we reading ahead? I mean, this week.
We're not.
Or, I mean,
Next week we're going to read the next chapter, chapter 4. And then I'm just letting people know that the big chapter 5, which is going to go on for like 30 pages of axioms and postulates, very descriptive. I want people will do that on their own, because it will put you to sleep if we all just do this together and record it. It'll be like 5 readings just of that. We'll fall asleep, you know. So I'd rather people just do that one on their own. Try to summarize, look through the proofs. You'll get the idea.
Oh, I thought you wanted us to do it this week, but I guess we could.
No, I mean you could start if you want to. Don't let me stop you. But no, I was just planting some seeds there.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Sweet. So Nathan, send me a message on Telegram.
Okay.
And I gotta wake up at 6 a.m. for a stupid interview, so I will have to, I guess, wrap this up tonight. I'm sorry, guys. I know usually we like some philosophical discourse, but can't do it.
Catch you all next week then.
All right.
Thank you
next week.
Bye,
Ciao.
y'all.
Thank you, Matthew.
Thank
Thank
you.
you. Have a good night,
See you
everybody.
guys.
Bye.